Hi, I'm indie fantasy author Melinda Kucsera, and today we have a special guest. That's Giles, and he is talking about his book, Langley Powell and the Society for the Defense of the Mundane. That's an interesting title. Welcome to
Thanks.
the podcast. I already have questions, but tell
All
us about
right.
the book first.
Okay, I'd be happy to. The book is a supernatural comedy about a renowned debunker of paranormal phenomena who dies in a freak accident and is very annoyed and embarrassed to discover that he has become a ghost. And from there, he finds himself wrapped up in a mission to save the universe
As a ghost?
as a ghost. Yes.
So he can have an impact on the world of living even though he himself is not living.
Well, so what he finds out shortly after dying is he finds out courtesy of Albert Einstein, actually, that the
That's
universe
that's one way to find out.
that there's sort of a spine to the universe, and there are layers, and you kind of advance through these layers as you live, as you go on. And so the plane of existence that he has just passed on from is sort of adjacent to the one that he's in now. And so the way that the mythology works in this world is that if you try hard enough, you can kind of plop down to the plane that you were in before and influence things in that way. Yeah.
Oh wow, that's so. It's. I'm picturing an onion. Is that the right?
Sort of.
Picture with is our world in the center?
Well,
or is something else in the center of this onion? And
man, so in the
I'm sorry, I said I might ask questions this time. I can't help it.
In the book, it's described more of like a tower. So if you imagine a tower that has sort of see-through pieces of plastic on it, and if you look down from the top of the tower, each of these pieces is a little bit opaque, and so you can't see all the way down. But if you had two of them next to each other, you could see. That's kind of how Einstein explains it. The onion analogy is not. It kind of works, but the center of the onion, I guess, would be the spine of the universe in the book.
What is the spine of the universe?
Well, that's kind of what Langley Powell, the protagonist, is on a quest to save. Yes, he's told that. Well, okay, so here's the deal. Langley becomes a debunker because as a child, he had a kind of a hero worship relationship with this famous magician. And the magician was disgraced publicly. And that turned Langley into this, the skeptic that he becomes. He was mocked by his friends. He had a very unhappy childhood because of what happened with this magician. And then when he dies, he's told by the president that this magician is the one who's trying to unravel the fabric of the universe by monkeying with the spine, so to speak. So that's how it comes into play. And Langley's trying to save everybody. He's trying to save the universe. He's trying to thwart whatever plan this magician may or may not have, depending on whether the president's telling the truth.
I'm almost afraid to ask who the president is. With election day being around the corner, is it play on current politics?
No, not really. There are a lot of famous people in the book. The president in this story, I thought it would be most appropriate to just invent like the blandest possible man, and of course he would be the president, because that's how you get elected often, is just by being as unobjectionable as possible to the broadest group of people. I know that is not what's happening right now, but often that's the case.
Wow. All right. So Langley Powell needs to, that's the main character, right?
Yes.
Needs to stop this other person from completely unraveling everything. Why does that person want to unravel everything? What's their reason for?
The reason that Langley is given is that this guy is power mad, that he's evil, and Langley doesn't really want to believe that. He doesn't want to accept it, because even though this guy was proven to be a fraud, it just doesn't make sense to Langley that he would be somebody who's trying to unravel the fabric of the universe. And the reader just has to figure out whether Langley is being told the truth or whether it's something else going on. And that's part of the mystery that gets solved throughout the book.
And what does Langley want? It can't just be to stop this person, because once that's done,
yeah,
you still have to exist in as well. Are you existing if you're a ghost? I guess you are, if you have some kind of autonomy, which it sounds like he has.
Yeah, these people in the the ghosts, they all have jobs and stuff. Langley's companion on this journey is a government agent whose job it is to sort of onboard new arrivals. So there is a social structure. There's a government. Obviously, there's a president. They do have autonomy. They do exist.
Of the ghosts? Wait, the ghosts have their own president?
Yeah. Yeah.
They have They have elections?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. You can't have anarchy, even if you're dead, right?
Right, but like, how do you elect? How do you run for office to be the president of all the ghosts? Like, how does that? That just sounds like. Now I need to know.
Now you need to know.
I need to know now.
There's no election in this story, so
okay.
The book won't answer that particular question for you. But yeah, it's just kind of like another world that sits on top of the one that we know, and it would look very familiar, just with some fundamental differences. But as for what Langley wants, he's obviously discombobulated in the beginning of the story. He wasn't prepared for an afterlife. And so in the beginning, he's just kind of chagrined.
So he thought everything just stops after death.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He's a debunker. He's a skeptic. He doesn't believe any of that stuff. That's his entire, that's his career. That's his brand.
And he was good with the idea of like everything ends at death and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So for a lot of the book, he's just sort of dumbfounded. And one of the lessons that Einstein teaches him when they meet is that the universe has a kind of a wicked sense of humor. And what Langley experiences repeatedly throughout the early part, particularly of his journey, is feeling like he's the butt of the universe's joke. So what he wants doesn't really come into focus until later in the book. In the beginning, he's just kind of being led along, and he's trying to do the right thing. He's trying to do what he's been asked to do, because it seems like if he doesn't, then maybe things will be very bad.
Yeah, and it sounds like he needed a direction, and this was like, hey, here's something for me concrete to do and focus on, so I'm not having to deal with this scary reality that what I thought, my whole worldview doesn't fit what's actually going on.
Yes.
Some serious recalibration.
Yes.
Oh, wow. Should we go to the excerpt, or do you want to talk some more about Langley and his world?
I can read the excerpt. That will just it'll set the scene. I'm going to read from the first chapter. So this will talk about who Langley is, how he became the way he is, and how he dies. Death, thought Langley Powell, might be the most mundane thing on earth. To most people, mundane might seem like something of an insult, particularly in this context. After all, what kind of person could possibly contemplate the end of life and call it ordinary? Unless you're a complete wacko, death is something to be feared and avoided, or at least staved off as long as possible. Deeming it mundane would seem to indicate a lack of respect for the sanctity of life. Needless to say, Langley Powell was not like most people. Not that he meant mundane in a negative way. Not at all. In fact, as any of the millions of people who had attended his seminars, purchased his books, or watched his television appearances could tell you, for Langley Powell, mundanity should be held in the highest regard. When questioned, he was fond of reaching into his satchel and removing a pocket edition of the New Oxford American Dictionary, letting it fall open to a page that had been consulted so many times it no longer even needed a bookmark. Here, he'd say, pointing to the word, mundane, of this earthly world rather than a heavenly or spiritual one. Of course, as the other person involved in these conversations invariably pointed out, and as you yourself might be noticing if you've opened your own New Oxford American Dictionary to see the definition of mundane for yourself, Langley Powell's preferred meaning of the word is listed second, after the first and most commonly accepted, which is lacking interest or excitement, dull. To anyone unfamiliar with Langley's finely honed stage patter, this always sounded like a solid retort, but they quickly discovered that the whole thing was really just a carefully constructed opening for him to step through, explaining to an invariably enraptured audience that earthly and dull had only grown connected in the human imagination after centuries of slander by charlatans and scoundrels. To twist a phrase I loaned the great singer-songwriter Paul Simon, Earth is a place of miracles and wonder, Langley would say at his seminars, pausing for a moment to soak in the applause that always greeted the photo of the two on stage during their joint appearance on Saturday Night Live. What could be more wonderful than a resplendent sunrise to greet the day? What could be more majestic than one of our planet's many natural monuments? What could be more soothing than the sound of the ocean? I could go on, but I'm sure you see my point. Mundane is the furthest thing from dull. Our earthly surroundings are awe-inspiring, and they deserve to be defended from those who seek to distract us and enrich themselves with ideas of fantastical phenomena and unseen spiritual planes. The next time you see a person who claims to be able to tell fortunes, contact the dead, move objects with his mind, or anything else that flies in the face of established science, I implore you, think of the mundane. Remember, it's all we have, and it's so much more than enough. After delivering that last line to thunderous applause, Langley would bow with a carefully practiced flourish and leave the stage, often heading directly to the airport to catch a flight to his next speaking engagement, and always thousands of dollars richer, an irony that seemed more or less completely lost to the attendees who'd paid handsome sums to hear Langley urging them not to give psychics and seers their money. Not that Langley's intentions were anything less than pure. The truth was that despite the fact that he delivered essentially the same performance every time he took the stage and had rehearsed every moment of it so thoroughly that he could have gotten through a show without giving it much conscious thought at all, he really believed everything he told his audiences. Langley was genuinely convinced that people all over the world had long been lulled into a false belief that not only were there aspects of human existence beyond our understanding, but that they were often somehow preferable to observable reality itself. He saw himself as a general on the battlefield in the war against logic, and although he developed a keen sense of showmanship over the years, he took his self-appointed responsibility seriously. To those who knew and frequently rolled their eyes at Langley, taking things seriously was something he excelled at to an exhausting degree. An only child, Langley had perplexed his parents in a variety of ways, none more so than the near total lack of a sense of humor he'd grown into during his late childhood. His mother was a teacher, and his father worked as a lineman for the telephone company, both solid, largely unacceptable careers that many would view as the less flattering variety of mundane, but well-paying enough to afford the Powells a comfortable suburban existence. A yard, a dog, a television in the living room. Young Langley had all the perks of middle-class living in post-war America, and as a small child, he'd seemed to enjoy them all, adding to the robust soundtrack of the Powell household with all the cacophonous laughter, imaginary battle sounds, and slamming of screen doors that have gone along with young boys for generations. In other words, by virtually any definition, young Langley Powell's life was good, and that him to grow into a man every bit as light-hearted and gregarious as his parents. He might very well have become that man too, if not for the thrilling exploits and humiliating fall of Neville Pemberton. He's barely a cultural footnote to the audiences of today, but when Langley was a boy, Neville Pemberton was a major star of stage and screen. And whether he was wowing crowds at Radio City Music Hall or reducing Johnny Carson to astonished guffaws, there seemed to be no act of wonder too great for him to perform. Could he read minds? Absolutely. Bend spoons and move objects with the power of his mind? Just watch him. Card tricks and other acts of prestidigitation beyond compare? Child's play. For decades, he was the world's premier paranormalist. And despite the efforts of countless would-be debunkers, no one had ever managed to find a rational explanation for Pemberton's amazing abilities. For the kids of young Langley's generation, there wasn't anything quite as exciting as a Neville Pemberton appearance. His guest spots on talk shows were not to be missed. His television specials were always cafeteria conversation fodder the following day. And if you were lucky enough to have parents who were willing or able to score the family tickets for a live show, well, you were a legend of the playground. The youth of America were enraptured by Pemberton, and Langley Powell was no exception. From the posable Pemberton action figure to the lunchbox and thermos set emblazoned with his name, face, and colorful logo, from the Pemberton magic set to a lifetime membership in Pemberton's Association of the Inexplicable, he had it all. So ardent was Langley's hero worship that when Pemberton was challenged to a test of his powers on live television, it scarcely even occurred to him that the outcome would be anything but yet another humiliating defeat for the latest non-believer. So certain was Langley in his idol's abilities that he agreed to wager every penny he'd stored up in his piggy bank against Orson Meade, a third-grade classmate whose scornful dismissal of Pemberton's might had been a source of irritation all school year. And when, on the fateful night, Neville Pemberton confidently strolled out before a live studio audience and faced his challenger, only to stutter in red-faced astonishment as he failed test after test, Langley resolutely believed it would all be explained as a terrible mistake of some sort, or the result of underhanded behind-the-scenes trickery. Standing lone and defiant before his peers, he insisted the mighty Pemberton had been framed. It was not to be. The following day, Pemberton faced a throng of reporters at a press conference and admitted that the jig was up. All of his amazing feats had been carefully orchestrated tricks, and while he would never reveal how he'd done it, his career as a full-time source of wonder was officially over. As Neville Pemberton stepped away from the podium and out of the public eye, Langley's shock and horror quickly curdled into a deep-seated disillusionment that would permanently alter the course of his life. He handed his money over to the hated Orson, mutely accepting the mockery that would become his birthright for the rest of his youth and adolescence. Never again simply Langley, he would always be greeted with snorts of, "Hey, Merlin," or, "Well, if it isn't the wizard." He stopped wearing hats after being asked for the 100th time if he had a rabbit hidden in them. He couldn't so much as pick up a pencil without some idiot screaming "Alakazam" and triggering uproarious laughter from the rest of the class. In high school, other boys joked that they needed to keep their girlfriends away from Langley lest he attempt to saw them in half. The great irony here, not that any of his doltish classmates ever bothered to notice, was that after Neville Pemberton's disgrace, Langley lost all interest in magic and the supernatural. In fact, the more he was taunted, the more he hated anything to do with any of it. And by the time he collected his high school diploma, he had long since vowed to leave town, reinvent himself at a college several states away, and never lay eyes on one of his youthful tormentors ever again. In a critical thinking class the following fall, Langley's heart was struck like a bell by the professor's opening lecture. Listening to the man's impassioned defense of reason, he knew immediately which path he was destined to follow. He nearly wept. Like so many college freshmen, Langley quickly learned firsthand how satisfying it can be to find yourself in a different place among different people, and in many ways he flourished. Freed from the burden of his misguided faith in a laughingstock, he made friends, joined clubs, and quickly rose to the top of his class. He even started wearing hats again. But whenever he returned home for a holiday or school break, it was as if he'd never left. Orson Meade, by now a college dropout who worked nights at the local bottling plant and lived in a one-room apartment over a laundromat, still hurled the same old insults at Langley whenever they crossed paths. Eventually, much to his parents' confusion and chagrin, he more or less stopped coming home at all. But while Langley's relationship with his parents was strained during his college years, things improved after he entered the professional world and started building a career for himself as a professional debunker. His business grew slowly at first, with his first couple years of clients coming from aggravated relatives of people who'd been fleeced by overpriced psychics or alleged spiritual mediums who'd made off with great chunks of their marked savings. But he soon developed a reputation as someone who could quickly and persuasively undermine and expose his targets. Before long, he was making talk show appearances of his own, trading barbs with indignant clairvoyants, and eclipsing their celebrity, one television spot at a time. By the time he was 30, Langley could afford to fly his parents wherever he wanted to meet them, rather than enduring another return visit to his hometown. By the time he was 40, he was able to purchase a Brooklyn brownstone, remodeling it into a duplex he shared with his parents. He'd grown into a doting son, albeit one who was also definitely something of a party pooper. By the time Langley's parents passed away, they'd been able to watch him ascend to full-blown celebrity status, embarking on a series of sold-out seminars while continuing to maintain regular appearances on late-night talk shows. He was the subject of a documentary, Langley Powell and the Defense of the Mundane, that broke box office records when it was picked up by a studio after screening at Sundance. When Langley's publicist talked him into launching his own website, the members of his robust online forum christened themselves the Society for the Defense of the Mundane. Decades after Neville Pemberton had ceased to be anything more than a faint memory for most of the public, the young boy who'd been humiliated by Pemberton's debunking had grown up to be the world's foremost debunker, exposing countless frauds along the way. All of which is to say that on the last afternoon of Langley Powell's life, as he was strolling down his street, tossing a grapefruit gently up and down in one hand while listening to his latest podcast appearance on the walk back to his brownstone from the corner bodega, he was in a pretty good mood. It was a beautiful day. He'd just signed a lucrative new book deal, and he was right then having a piano hoisted up to the 5th floor, where he envisioned spending countless hours playing. Perhaps Paul Simon might stop by. And all of that is to explain why Langley, lost in his sunny afternoon reverie, didn't hear the cries of "oops" and "look out" until it was too late. Langley only had the briefest of instants to look up and realize what was about to happen to him. Just enough time for the events we've just recounted here to flash before his eyes and to finally conclude that yes, death really might be the most mundane thing on earth. With the exception of his years of torment at the hands of Orson Meade, who now rented shoes at the local bowling alley and worked part-time as an assistant to the high school wrestling coach, Langley had enjoyed a remarkably fortunate life, which is perhaps why he observed his impending demise with a surprising degree of bemused detachment. So this was the end. He'd had a good run. Also, the underside of a piano was surprisingly aesthetically pleasing from this angle. Who could complain? And then, just as he closed his eyes, braced himself for the moment of impact, and prepared to say goodbye to existence forever, Langley heard the sound and felt the great relief of the largest flatulence he'd ever experienced. He'd never done anything so uncouth in public, but he couldn't stop himself. The feeling was as blissful as anything he could remember. It seemed to go on forever. So long, in fact, that he wondered how he hadn't already been crushed by the piano. Feeling simultaneously lighter and immensely appalled, he opened his eyes to see his new piano shattered to pieces on the sidewalk, with some unfortunate person's legs poking out from underneath the wreckage. A crowd had gathered, murmuring things like, "So tragic," and "unbelievable," and "what a stupid way to go." Sirens blared from several blocks away. Looking around in stunned disbelief, Langley tried to piece together what could have happened. Had the person under the piano pushed him out of the way? Had he experienced some sort of strange vertigo and only thought he was in its path? And why was the corpse wearing his shoes? Langley gingerly stepped closer to the gathering crowd, peering over the shoulder of a man filming the scene with his phone. Yes, those were definitely his shoes, and also his pants, and that was definitely his grapefruit rolling into the gutter. "Excuse me," he said to the man, determined to get closer. "I live here. That was my piano." The man didn't move, didn't stop filming, didn't acknowledge Langley at all. "Excuse me," Langley repeated himself, louder this time. "I live here. That was my piano. Would you kindly step aside?" Once again, the man failed to register Langley's presence. Outraged, he reached out to tap him on the shoulder and watched in astonishment as his finger, followed by his entire hand up to the wrist, passed straight through the man without making any impact at all. It felt warm and moist, somehow simultaneously comforting and repulsive. Langley instinctively jerked his arm back and stared at it, gawping in horrified amazement. Langley Powell had dedicated his entire adult life to honoring the observable, the provable, the known. He had urged millions of people to use their good senses to observe the world around them, draw rational conclusions, and reject the rest. By his own standards, there was only one possible deduction he could possibly make. Langley Powell had died and become a ghost. He was, in a word, annoyed. That's it.
I always get caught off guard by that. I'm never ready for it to end. What's one hell of a beginning.
Thank you.
So now I want to know what happens.
Good. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, but I can't do that till after the podcast. We've got an episode to finish. Listeners are depending on us to get this done. So all right. So I can't get over he got killed by his own piano. That's such a cartoon thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's such a flashback to Bugs Bunny or other. I don't even know if that happened in Bugs Bunny, but that's where my brain went.
I mean, it's very appropriate. Yeah. And that's the beginning of very comically rude things happening to Langley. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the flatulence.
Yeah. That's a recurring thing. It is not, it has to do with, that's the sound of energy transfers.
I didn't know that energy transfers made a sound, but I mean, if it's got to make a sound, why not that? So I'm guessing is there magic in this world? Like, is that how they?
I would say there is of a sort. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. There are things that, yes. There are many things about existence that Langley was wrong about. And that I think that's one of them for sure. Yeah.
Okay. And then the worlds. So you said that the world they're similar.
Yeah.
So what is different about them? Or is that you have to read the book kind of thing?
There are a number of things. When the first thing that Langley realizes is that he's very hungry. He's starving. And that is because of the vast energy transfer that he's just expended in the process of dying. And so he goes for a walk back to the bodega where he bought that grapefruit, and it's different. There are only foods there that have been discontinued. So they're like snack foods and sodas from the 70s. I think he gets, if I'm remembering right, he gets a McDLT. That's one thing that's different. And the reason for the discontinued foods is that, without getting too far into the weeds, what he learns is that the way a ghost sort of subsists is through memory. When they eat, they have a nostalgic rush, whether they're, Langley eats the McDLT and he remembers what it was like when that was a thing in the 80s. It comes back to him. It replenishes him. At one point, he comes across a pile of discontinued sci-fi magazines and he leafs through the pages. He remembers being a subscriber when he was a kid, and that replenishes him. So that's one difference. The ghosts can, for lack of a better word, sort of teleport. So there's no need for cars. But at one point he does ride a ghost train. That's just off the top of my head. There are probably other differences that I'm not remembering right now. It looks a lot. It looks very similar because it's kind of on top.
Right. So if something changes in one world, do those changes happen in the world stacked on top of it? Like, how does this work? Like, let's say an earthquake destroyed, I don't know, some random city that I don't want to name a real city, and I don't want to happen. So we'll make up a city name, Citylandia, which does not actually exist. Let's say it does exist, and it's somewhere where earthquakes happen, and it was completely decimated in one world. Would the version of it in the next world be affected? Like, is there like do they affect each other? Do changes in one affect? Yeah, I think that's my question.
Outstanding question. It is not addressed really at all in the book. I think probably, sure. Yeah, I think it would have to. I don't know.
would it
maybe
be
that's a
like
question.
shockwaves or like it's
Right.
like, I guess I'm trying to understand like the connection between these different layers. Like how is it like layers of a cake where like if you affect the whole structure, yeah, they're affected, but like if you just spoon some frosting off the top, the cake layers are nothing is happening to them because they're not affected by you spooning some frosting off the top like a you know.
I like that. I think yes. And probably the further apart the planes are where things are happening, the less effect there is, the less impact there would be. Yeah, I think that's I'm thinking about all this really for the first time right now. I think that's probably the answer. Maybe if there's another book, that's a question to get into.
Okay. Yeah, I'm still stuck on like it being like worlds stacked on top of each other and like do they like like I mean, do they have weight? Do they squish each other? Like, if you were to take let's just say somebody found a way to knock one of the worlds off the top. Like, right. I'm sorry, I just can't get over that.
Everything from above just drops down. Yeah.
What happens to the people in that world, or another world spontaneously like appears, and on top, does it squash everybody at the bottom? What's
These
at
are
the
great
bottom?
ideas. There's a whole series here, clearly waiting to be.
Yeah. What's in the bottom world and why is it on the bottom? Where did the spine come from? Yeah, I have so many questions. I'm sorry. I'm not giving you a chance to answer.
I think the book will answer some of those questions for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just can't get over the world stacked on top of each other. Like the physics, how that affects people. Are there copies of people in different worlds? So you can move between. So like he died and went from our world to the layer above. Do you die again as a ghost, or do something and go to the next level?
Right.
And when you reach the top, what happens? You just evaporate?
There are other levels, and all he's really told is that this is not the end. It doesn't. Right. Yeah.
Is it like recycling? Is it like not a tower that's and you come back down to the bottom and work your way up again?
I think the underlying idea is that you continue to evolve as a person, even beyond what we think of as death. Okay. So you, it's probably close to what people imagine as, or what people have imagined for a long time as the ideal of a nation, as you just kind of, I don't know, refine and purify yourself through cycles of life. I think that's the idea.
Okay. Like where did you get this idea from? Other than
I had a coworker who she was about half my age, but she would still, it was kind of her thing. Anytime I made her upset, she would tell me that she was going to haunt me from beyond the grave. And I'd always scoff at that and say, there's no way that I'm going to outlive you, first of all. And second, that you're just not, you're not going to haunt me. Maybe I'll haunt you, is what I said one day. And she said, well, you don't even believe in ghosts. And I said, yeah, you're right. That's kind of funny. And it made me think, how funny would it be if somebody who didn't believe in ghosts died and realized that they were one? And then from there, I started thinking about what kind of person would be so intensely dedicated to life ending with death that it would really kind of mess them up or anger them to discover that there was more. And that's how I started thinking about somebody who was a debunker. And that led me to the time period that Langley grew up in, when you could see people like the amazing Randy on late night television, or I think it was Uri Geller who challenged, and he said if anybody could prove that they actually had paranormal abilities, that he would pay them $1 million. That kind of thing used to be much more part of pop culture. And so I started with Langley being born in 1960 and growing up in the late 60s and early to mid 70s, back when, variety shows were still a thing on television, and there was more room for that type of person who was kind of famous without being a musician or an actor. And then the world kind of fell together as I was writing the book. I came into it not believing that I had a novel in me. And so initially I reached out to somebody that I had collaborated on things with in the past. And I said, I got this idea and it's nagging at me. It won't leave me alone. I want to see where I can take it, but I don't know if I could write a whole novel. And so here, maybe I'll write the opening chapter, then you write a chapter, then I'll write one. We'll go back and forth that way. So I wrote that chapter that I just read, and then he wrote a second chapter, and then I wrote, 3 or 4. And at that point he came back and he was like, this is clearly your baby and you need to be the one to finish it. So this was 2020, which probably a year that many books were written due to people just staying home. I had a week off from work coming up in April of that year. I was not able to go on the vacation that I had planned for obvious reasons. So I stayed home and spent the week just trying to see how much I could write. And at the end of that week, I had, 5 or 6 chapters. And from there, I devoted weekends for the rest of the year to knocking the rest of it out, and finished the first draft right around Thanksgiving of that year.
It's awesome that you remember when you wrote it. Like after you've written a few books, you're like, well, I wrote it. I think I wrote it in this year. And people ask like, how long did it take you to write it? I don't know.
Being anchored to COVID probably helped.
Yeah, I wrote a few books during COVID, but I could not tell you now that it's a few years out from 2020 when I started writing any of them. I know when they published. It's about it. And you were saying before this show that you have a podcast. I think you need to tell us about that.
Yeah, I co-host a show called the Record Player Podcast with a dear friend of mine, Matt Wardlaw. And this is probably the 3rd or 4th podcast we've done together. This one's been going for a couple years now. I think we just published our 140th episode. The concept is that every guest picks an album that they want to talk about. And that usually takes up the first half of the show. And then the back half of the show, we talk about whatever they're there to promote. We talk to a lot of authors, talk to a lot of musicians. And as I was telling you before we started recording, the idea, I don't know how much this corresponds with your experience, but for me, I've been interviewing people for a very long time, for decades. And especially in the beginning, it was a nerve-wracking experience for me. And then when I started publishing books and being interviewed, I realized that it was just as nerve-wracking on the other side. And so I thought doing it like this would make it easier to establish a conversational rapport, to not put them on the spot right out of the gate and say, talk to us about this thing that you did. Instead, we start out by talking about something that they love, and then they can, passionately advocate for some piece of art that moved them. So yeah, it's called The Record Player, and I like it. I would love it if everybody listening to this listened to it as well.
Yeah, no, you got to send me the link, because I was looking back through what you sent me and there's no link to the podcast. So after the show, make sure to send me that so I can include it in the show notes. So that,
like many creative people, I'm a terrible self-promoter. I simply forgot.
No, that's fine. That's my job as the host, to be like, hey, there's this neat thing that they are doing. We should talk about it. We should mention it. We should get links. That's part of what I do here. Maybe I can come on your podcast sometime and be on the other side of the interview.
Absolutely.
Once.
Yes. Start thinking about an album that you love.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not a big music person. I'm a big book person, but I mostly listen to trailer music. I like Audio Machine. I just saw they have a new album, which I have to go check out at some point while writing for maybe, and figure out which book we're going to write to that one. Writing a lot of books to their music. It's very epic. It sounds
I
like
listened
a
to a lot of instrumental stuff while I was writing this book.
check out Audio Machine. They're
All
awesome.
right. Okay.
They have many, many albums. I have most of them, but I don't know that I have to double check that I have all of them. But yeah, I like them a lot. They're great to write to because it's all instrumental and it sounds like mini soundtracks of things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they're just really cool. They haven't done it in a while, but they used to do these like concerts where they'd invite other musicians because it's just a couple of guys and they record all the instruments and they got like people who play instruments, musicians in wherever they're doing the concert to come and play their music with them. And sometimes they have audience participation with it. If you're like a musician, it's very cool. They've done some very neat stuff.
It takes a lot of faith to invite somebody from the audience up on stage during one of your shows.
Well, sometimes people just like bring the music because they're like people who are into them tend to be musicians or people who are like art creative folks because it's trailer music, so that and a lot of their music is used by Marvel for their trailer music or
Got
other blockbuster movies. Marvel used quite a few of them. But that's what it's written for. But there's also an audience of just random people who like to listen to their music while they write or create art or do video editing or things where you don't want words because you're concentrating on something and you just need like the swelling music because that keeps your brain, some of us, it keeps our brains engaged in what we're doing. Yeah. And I also saw in when you signed up for the interview that you're a culture writer. What is that? What is a culture writer? Like, what does that mean? And what, yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit.
I started out as a music critic and I did that for a long time. I have written about things that are not music, but are pop culture since then. Movies, books, etc. That's just been kind of my wheelhouse, and I've gone in and out of writing for money for a long time and done other things periodically. I owned a label for a while, record label for a while. I was a recording artist for a minute. Yeah.
Did you produce anybody at this label that we might recognize?
No, I did not.
Okay. Anybody that we wouldn't recognize. Because, Google's a thing.
You should look up a guy named Fred Wilhelm. He was one of the artists that I had signed, and he's a great guy. And he's still a professional songwriter in Nashville. We released an album of his called A Midlife, which I think is great. So I did that. I went in and out of writing. Writing, this is probably something that you've heard from a lot of your guests, that writing can be very fulfilling. It can feel like a compulsion. It can pull you back because it feels like that's really what you're here to do, but very often it is not particularly lucrative. So there have been more than once I've thought,
it's boom and bust for a lot of us. Some people are able to make steady money, but for a lot of us, it's boom and bust. Right. Where you make some money because you just put out a book and you did all the marketing and the sales. And sometimes you put out a book and you don't bother doing any of the marketing and sales. And you're like, you let it be what it is because you don't have the bandwidth or, you've got other things going on in your life and you're just not able to do all the things. And then you take too long to write the next book and the sales taper off.
Sometimes the security of working for the man can be pretty appealing compared to, it's an insecure lifestyle.
Yeah. I'm very familiar with that. I have a full-time job. Yeah. So not in writing.
Right. And I think that's important too, is to not do what you love for money. Writing, there have definitely been times when what I have been doing, the things that I have been writing or the words that I've been working with for a job have led me to question whether or not I'm harming the muse by, doing hack work or whatever. I think it's a more complicated equation than people realize unless they are writers themselves. But yeah, that's kind of, I have always sort of snapped back to writing about pop culture over and over again. My first book was an oral history of a long running daytime show called One Life to Live that was published not long after the show was canceled. The second book I wrote was a collection of facts and about beer that was written for the people at Uncle John's. They were the folks that published it was a long running series called The Bathroom Reader. And I thought that was kind of just what I was meant to do, was write about pop culture or write nonfiction. And again, I never thought that I had a novel in me until I wrote this one.
That's very often the case. Until you do something, you don't know that you can do it.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know when I wrote when I was writing the first book that I published, which was Curse Breaker Enchanted, that like I'd be able to actually finish the book. I'd read many other things and not finished them.
Yeah.
So until I did it, I didn't know. But then once you've done it once, you're like, all right, I can do this.
I can do this. Yeah. And now when am I going to do it again? What's the next next story? Yeah.
I saw an interesting comment somewhere on social media today to think about not, instead of like reframing, like if you are someone who wants to like make money from a lot of money from writing and live off it, like you can't think about, well, what do I want to write next? You have to think about, what do I want to sell next? Because if you want to make money from writing, you have to spend probably between 5 to 20 hours a week on the business of marketing it, advertising it, selling it, getting it in front of people. And if you don't, so it's got to be something you like enough to push that hard.
Yeah, that's true. And I don't think that comes easily to a lot of people who.
No. And 5 to 20 hours is like, that's, if you want to be full time, that's probably what you need to do if you want to be a writer. But if you already have a job and you don't need to make a ton of money from writing, then you can think about, well, what do I want to write? And you don't have to care so much about like, what does the market want? Because you're not trying to satisfy the market. You're trying to satisfy the fans that you have, the readers that you have, and yourself. Because if it's not fun, you're not going to write it.
Yeah, I think once you start, if you're writing with an eye towards satisfying the market, then you're probably not going to deliver your best work, in my opinion.
I mean, I wouldn't say that, because some people are delivering what the market wants, but it's also like what they like to read.
Sure.
So it's like, I think it's fine. Like marketability is finding that sweet spot between what you like to read and what the market wants, and going from there. And there's no stigma, there's no shame in that. Like,
no,
we all have to do our own math and figure out, because if you have a lot of other stuff going on in your life, you may need the writing to make money, or you may not be able to do it, so yeah. I don't want to say that, that the people who are writing to market because they want to make money are doing something wrong, or that they're hacks or anything, because that's not the case. They're writing because they love it, but they also need to make money because maybe they're raising kids and they're not able to work a regular job, and to take time away from childcare, the books have to do something.
That's all very true. I do think it comes down to that sweet spot that you're talking about. I think I think you have to write what you want to read, right? You have to. It has to entertain you
first.
Yeah, right.
Or you have to be willing to compromise on that, because sometimes what you want to read there may not be a lot of readers out there who also want to read it, or there might be, but you just may not have a way of getting in front of them. Yeah.
I know. I think promoting fiction is a lot more difficult than nonfiction, because if you write a book about One Life to Live, you know exactly who your audience is. You know how to reach them. If you write a book about beer, same principle applies. If you're writing a novel, then potentially the entire world is your audience, and you just have to figure out how to find the right people. It's a trickier proposition, I think.
Yeah. I would definitely agree with that. I definitely think that it is a bit trickier if you maybe like to read something that maybe the rest doesn't have a huge audience
Yeah.
and you want to make money. Maybe getting a day job would be a good idea. So you don't have as much pressure on the writing and the books, because it is a saturated market. So that's something that isn't really talked about as much, but there is a level of saturation in the market right now. All right. We didn't talk about, is this a standalone? Is it a series?
It is left open-ended.
Okay.
The ending, I didn't want to, I wanted to leave it so that I like these characters. I like imagining that they're still kind of out there. I didn't want to totally send them off into the sunset. So the ending is very open, and if enough people want another book, then I'll have to come up with another story. I don't know where they would go from here. I haven't figured that out, but the possibility is definitely there.
Okay. All right. So for right now, it's a standalone with an open ending.
Yeah.
Is there like a number in your mind of how many people have to request the sequel to make it happen? Or is it like if one person asks, then you'll sit down and figure it out?
I don't know. I try to, I try to go where the muse drags me. Right now I'm writing a detective story that I'm telling people is kind of like Chinatown with jokes. So it isn't fantasy at all this time. I don't know. Like I said, I like these characters. I would enjoy spending more time with them. And I guess I'm just waiting for their next adventure to manifest itself in my brain. I don't have a magic sales number in mind. I haven't even seen sales reports yet, so I don't know how many people got this thing.
I mean, you just have to open your KDP dashboard and you can just click the sales dashboard.
This is stuff I got to get from the publisher. I don't have access
to it. Okay. Oh, you were published through okay.
I published through a small company called Humorist Books. Yeah.
I'm not familiar with them. And how was your experience with that? I've only done self-publishing, so I don't have any experience with being published by someone else.
Well, I knew enough about the publishing environment to know that even if you sign with a big company at this point, you may be called upon to develop your own marketing plan. You may be called, I think these days authors are expected to carry a lot more of that side of things than a lot of people would expect. And I am here to tell you that that's even more the case with a small publisher. I don't know how many resources they really have for aggressive promotion. So I'm kind of pounding the pavement on my own behalf, trying to spread the gospel of Langley Powell.
Yeah. And you only get a percentage of the royalties with this.
Yeah. With this deal, with this company, rather than in advance, it's a 50-50 split. So it's, again, we've been talking about the compromises that you make as somebody who's trying to make a living with creative work. And, this is one of them. As a writer, do you want to self-publish and take 100%, or I guess whatever's left of 100 after Amazon takes its chunk, or do you want to?
For me, yes, because most books, this is a thing that a lot of people don't know, is that most books, whether you're self-published or published by a publisher, if you to be a mid-lister, you sell 12 books. So if all you so if in mid-listers that used to be able to live on that with the advance, and but yeah, if you're only going to sell 12 books and you're only getting 50% of that, which the publisher is usually getting 70% from Amazon and you're getting 50% of that,
right.
you're making like enough to buy a coffee at Starbucks.
Right.
If you want Erewhon, you need to self-publish because then you get the 70% of those 12 books. And some people sell a lot more than that, but on average, there was a study that came out, I think it was last year, and that was the eye-opening finding. If you beat that 12 books, you're doing better than most mid-listers.
I think that's the kind of thing that should be talked about more openly, probably. I think for anybody, for musicians, for authors, the platonic ideal of your career that we grew up believing in is that you find a company who's willing to distribute your work and make it a worldwide smash, and once you put your ink on the contract, and that's kind of that's your happy ending. That's the end of the rainbow. That's the goal. That's the dream. But I don't think it was ever really like that. And it certainly isn't like that now. It's a lot harder to find an audience. Everything is very,
it's a bit saturated. Yeah.
Saturated, and everything is its own sort of niche now. There's no monoculture, and that has benefited a lot of artists who would have been gatekept out in the past, but it also, like you said, it's saturated. You may have to, it's harder to cut through the noise and find the people who are waiting for your work, waiting to fall in love with your work. It's tough.
Yeah. It is, but but even if you only find a small audience, it's still very rewarding because those readers will champion you and will, because I don't have a huge reader base, and that's fine because I love my readers. They're wonderful and they love my books and I love them for it. They're waiting for the next book, and it's coming. I'm trying to finish it, but it's a curse breaker book, and those books are fraught with complications because the characters don't listen to me. Don't listen to anything. I have an outline. I have a blurb. There's things that we promised that they would do because of the way the previous book ended, and I hope and pray they will do those things.
But they're being stubborn. Yeah. Also, I really very much believe that a large audience is not necessarily everything it's cracked up to be. I think.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too far into the weeds here. There are a lot of things I believe about media and what it needs in order to continue in a useful fashion. But I'm not sure that our obsession with scale is very healthy. And I think that having there's a whole marketing theory about this, and I can't remember the exact number, but it's like if you have 10,000 dedicated fans, that's really all you don't need to sell 1 million of anything. If you have a group of people,
1,000 true fans is the thing, but that works. The math for that doesn't work if you're selling an ebook for $2.99. If you're selling like a high priced course for like, I don't know, $100, then when the 1,000 true fans thing works mathematically. But if you're selling a book for $2.99 and you get 70% of that, even if 1,000 people buy it, like you still can't quit your day job.
Yeah.
But
there's a sense of community there, right? And the more people that feel like they, people feel an ownership of your stuff. And I think if you, I think it's easy to get knocked off your creative axis if you know that you're writing for a very large audience and you want to make sure that people are satisfied with what you're doing. I think it's easy to get out of your head. And if you have more of a community, I think that's great. That's a happy medium that can really, that can sustain you very well. So.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. Just knowing that there are people waiting for the next book, there's something like just makes you all warm and that you just a warm fuzzy feeling that like you're not writing this for because like when you write your first book, you're writing it for a faceless person, and you hope that people will like it. But when you're writing, when you know that people have bought it and they're looking for the next book, you're writing for them, for those specific people. They are now every time you're thinking about. At least this is true for me. When the characters come with these wild twists, I'm like, they're it's not faceless people. It is people who have names and who have written emails to me, and like I'm like, oh, are they gonna like this? Should I let them do this? They're gonna not do this if I tell them they can't do this. So yeah, it becomes both easy. It becomes both easier because you have that persona in mind. You have these people in mind, and you are writing it for them, and it's very fulfilling on my side. That's why I have so many books. I love writing them for you all.
You're chasing that rush.
No, it's not really a rush. It's just a warm, like happy feeling of knowing that like they're expecting the next book in the series, and you're giving that to them by sitting down at, each as often as you can to get those, to make the characters move the story forward. All the fighting with the characters becomes 100% worth it. And then you can't wait to hear what they thought of it. Did they like it?
Yeah.
Did that thing you weren't sure about, did that you couldn't get the characters not to do, did that work out? Were the characters right, or were you right? Who was right there? That's always the big question in my mind. There's always one twist that I'm like, should we do this? And the character's like, well, yes, we should. Readers are going to want to see this. And I'm like, but will they? And we have this little back and forth. And then when it comes out, I find out that most of the time the characters were right. The readers did want to see this, even if they didn't know that they wanted to see this. Yeah, hopefully that continues forever. That the characters are right about these things. But yeah, we're gotten off topic somewhere. So let's come back to Langley Powell and the Society for the Defense of the Mundane. And speaking as a mundane person myself, with a magical world in my head, it's so. All right, so I saw the book is out on Amazon. Is it widely available, or is it just on Amazon? I don't know how small presses do things.
You can order it. I wouldn't expect to walk into your local indie bookstore and find it on the shelves, but they can get it for you. It's
okay.
Yeah, you can
so
order
they
it.
can order it from the Ingram's catalog. Very cool.
Yeah,
very cool.
Yeah.
But in terms of the ebook, I think I saw it's in Kindle Select, so it's in.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's awesome. Is there any sales coming up? I don't know if you would know because it's the publisher handles all that stuff. They have control of the pricing.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. And you said you're writing a detective novel?
I am. I'm working on another couple of nonfiction books as well as the next novel.
What are the nonfiction books about? Just I was curious about what people are writing. I don't know.
Yeah, of course. I think that's fun stuff to talk about. I am working on one of the nonfiction books is called Reset, and it's a collection of interviews with people who've been through experiences that force them to start over, whether it's serious illness, divorce, job loss, things like that. The idea being that there are these experiences that I think we're all kind of terrified of, but every so often life forces us to go through them. And I think very often we come through the other side as stronger, happier, more fully realized versions of ourselves. And my hope is that all of these interviews will reinforce that. So far they have. I've heard some pretty wonderful stories from, well, not wonderful because some of them are pretty sad, but people triumph. They're stronger than they think they are. And I think that's a valuable message. So I'm looking forward to getting that one done. The other nonfiction one is a book that I've been working on for quite a while with a couple of other writers. It's called Death by Power Ballad, and it consists of more than 60 personal essays about classic power ballad songs. I know you said you're not much of a music person, but there's a lot of
I'm sorry
classic
about
80s rock in there. No, that's all right. So I've been doing a lot of interviews with musicians and songwriters for that book lately. And then, yeah, the next novel it's called Largo's Dream, and it's about a PI who is lured back to LA 5 years after leaving in disgrace because his ex-girlfriend wants him to solve the murder of her father.
Wow. And it doesn't take place in the same world, right?
As Langley Powell? No, it takes place in the real world. Yeah.
That's cool. And so that's very cool. So we've got the power ballads, we get the reset. Which one is coming out? Which one's the furthest along?
Probably power ballad. We started work on that like 10 years ago, and then one of the writers, he had to step away for a period of time, and the other two of us just sort of got busy and let it collect dust for a while. And so this year I went back to them and I was like, look, this is almost done. Let's just drag it across the finish line. And so for most of this year, I've been making a point of always being in pursuit of some songwriter, some rock star, so we can ask them questions about one of the songs in the book. So I think that one's probably closest to being done.
Very cool. It's always interesting to hear what people are writing and how I know it's always interesting hearing people writing multiple books at the same time, because I'm like, am I the only one who does that?
You're not.
They're always fantasy books though. As my poor patrons will say, there's like 2 right now that I'm going back and forth between. Although I've been faithful to the One Whip for 2 weeks now. Yeah, because that's the one that has to get out soonest, most anticipated of the lot. Yeah, so I feel that. So your power ballad is your next one, and then after that is Reset or the detective story.
The detective story is about 20,000 words long. So what's the a novel has to be at least 80,000 words, right? So I guess I'm
80, 90.
a fourth or a fifth long. The Reset one. Yeah.
If you're gonna publish it yourself and not go through a small press, then it does not need to be as long, because the Maltese Falcon is not 80 to 90,000 words, but that was from a different era. But it is a pulpy detective story, and it's very good, even though it's shorter, because novels in those days were shorter. They had less characters. There was more focus on the main character, and he just didn't need as many words to tell that story. But now I don't know that a traditional publisher or a small press would take a shorter story. But yeah, if you were self-publishing, then there is not a rule about, because 40,000 words is considered a novel, because Maltese Falcon and many other novels from the pulp era days were 40 to 50,000 words.
That is a very good point. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I don't know if I'm going to self-publish. I have self-published and been happy with that. This time around, I really felt like I had something sellable, and so I wanted to give it a good shot. I wanted to try to find a home for it, just to say that I did it. And as we've discussed, there are pros and cons to everything. And so I don't know. I might try to find a publisher for that book, or I might just put it out myself. And you're right. If I do it that way, then it could be as long as I want it to be. I don't know how many words the story will naturally end up being. It is not narratively close to being done. I know where it's going to go, and I'm not there yet. So, yeah.
No, that's that's a valid answer. It's hard to know how many words. I have this problem all the time, because it makes it hard to set pre-order dates and expectations about when the next book will come out, when I don't know how long the next book will be. because I do self-publish. I don't have a press or anything. There is not like a minimum or a maximum word count that I'm going for. I'm just however many words the characters need to tell the story that we're trying to tell.
I think that's the way to go.
Yeah.
Tell the story until it's done. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have my longest book is 165,000 words. That's Cursebreaker Enchanted. The second longest book is 145,000 or 50,000 words, which is Storm the Gates, which is coming out in November. Yeah. So, but I have books that are like 60,000 words, or it's whatever is needed for the story, which I think is, I mean, either way is valid. Like if that's a condition of your contract, then you have to fulfill the condition. You can't be like, well, the story doesn't want to be longer than this. If they're paying you for X amount of words, you got to give them X amount of words. That's the thing with traditional publishing. It kind of found you're not fulfilling your contractual obligations. Yeah. So that's awesome. So thank you, Jeff Giles. Is there anything else you want to say about Langley Powell and the Society for the Defense of the Mundane, or for anything else that we've been talking about in this past hour or so?
Nothing immediately comes to mind. I've just had a good time talking to you. Thank you for making room for me here. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, you can come back with the next fantasy book.
All right. Sounds good. And you said the next one's coming out in November. It is November. So the time will be soon upon us that you'll be looking for podcasts that you can go on to.
I'm always available. Yeah, if you want me to come on, I'd definitely love to come on. Yeah, no, my next book, Storm of the Gates, comes out on November 8th. And then probably the one I'm writing now will be the next one that'll come out, Chasing Dragons. I don't know how many more words the characters want for this one. The story just we did all the things we promised, and then they just took this left turn that I'm like, I can follow this.
Yes.
So we'll see what that ends up being. But yeah, no, I love to come on. Definitely let me know how to schedule that. And definitely send me the link to your podcast. We can put it in the show notes. Yeah, so... And I've been your indie fantasy author, Melinda Kucsera, and this has been Jeff Giles, and we've been talking about Langley Powell and the Society for the Defense of the Mundane, which sounds like a really fun ride, so I hope y'all go check it out. And we'll be back with another podcast next week and another fantasy author. So have a great day or a great night wherever you are.